All right, so anybody has any questions or concerns they would like to bring up at this point in time? Um, in terms of content, getting to the classroom, all that type of good stuff? No? Everybody's okay? All right. I did
Yes, sir.
ask. I did ask. Remember that. Okay, so let me start sharing my screen and then we'll pick up from. Right, so I do want this actually up. All right, let me just shut my camera off so that you all could focus on the PowerPoint. And as per usual, I'm using kind of indented things so I can see the people who are in class and identify people to chat with. So today we're looking at chapter 2, and well, you'll see what chapter. Anybody had a chance to read chapter 2 or at least go through these slides? Maybe not.
No, sir.
Okay. All right. So we're going to be going through chapter 2 today. So we're starting by looking at the nature of leadership and how it's changing over time. Now, one of the things that we're going to start by seeing here is that a lot of people, especially in the work environment, they view leadership positions as a place, something to be achieved. That might be true, um, in that it takes a lot of effort and work to arrive in a situation where you are now managing people and so on. It's not something that easily comes to everybody. And as a result, therefore, leaders, people who arrive in positions of leadership, generally have some, they create an emotive response from the people around them. So for some people, they're very, they like their leaders and they revere their leaders, whereas other people can't stand leaders or they would have a problem with them. And the that is going to be something that we're going to be paying attention to. This whole concept of leadership is the end game or the result that we need to get to, as opposed to leadership is the beginning of something. And that may also connect with how people respond to you when you're looking at leadership positions and how people perceive you in that leadership position. So, interestingly enough, leadership is one of those things that has been under observation for a fairly long time. Um, but although it has been studied for a long time, it's one of the least understood phenomenons on Earth, as Burns talks about here from 1978. Now, the whole situation is one that creates a problem where we end up having a lot of different people basically throwing in their 2 cents and making observations. And we don't end up with a definitive set of ideas and ideologies about what's taking place. Somebody's on their way in. Hey, it's Miss Mohammed. Hello, Miss Mohammed.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, Miss Mohammed. Welcome to your first class,
Thank you.
leadership and ethics. Can you tell me a little bit about what program you do?
Um, I'm in the management and entrepreneurship program.
And how far into the program are you?
This is my second year.
All right. Okay. Have you been able to navigate to the e-classroom?
Yes, I have.
And did you look at the videos and stuff that we have there?
Sadly, I have not gotten time. I've been kind of finding a schedule for the
Oh,
past week. I am planning on doing that tonight, though.
okay. So, in the interim, you probably don't know that you've been assigned to a group and you've been assigned a presentation due on the 21st of October. And your partners have been trying to reach out to you, Miss Regis and Mr. Batiste, Mr. Braffett, sorry.
Yeah.
Um, have they reached out to you?
Um, I think so.
All right. Well, we have a WhatsApp chat group. Have you been able to join that?
Yes, I joined today.
All right, good. So what they can probably do is, Regis, you guys have some sort of group chat for
So
the.
she's already in the group, in our
She
group
is?
chat.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right,
All
good.
right. Yeah.
Okay, so that you understand what is required of you for the assignments, and they can school you in the rest of the stuff that you might have missed off,
Okay. Yeah.
right? So Regis, Braffett, now let's get this straight, right? You then become responsible for her work in this course. So if she fails, then you all fail. Okay, let's put it that way. Is that fair?
Okay.
Is it ready?
No, no, it is not.
No.
No, it's not fair. That's ridiculous. But I'm providing some responsibility for you guys to, can I help bring along? Michaela, if you have issues or problems, you can reach out to me because I'm also part of the main WhatsApp chat group to get any sort of clarification for any of the assignments that we have to do and so on. All right. So, especially the first video of the first session, which is the introduction, go through that one. It's probably the shortest one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that way, you get a better idea of all the assignments and the expectations I have for you guys. And one of the assignments that you have to kind of do something for as well. All right?
Okay.
Okay. So today, what we're doing is we're looking at chapter two of presentations. I'm dealing with chapter two, and next week I'll be dealing with chapter three, and that ends my teaching in terms of content. So today we're looking at leadership and its evolution over time. And what the thing that we've come to at this point in time is the discussion that leadership is one of those areas that has been researched a lot, has been studied a lot. People have postulated a lot of theories about what is leadership, what makes a good leader, and so on. There are hundreds, possibly even thousands of texts, various programs that you can join about becoming a leaders. Some of these are just some of them. Any of you are familiar with any of these leadership programs here that I have pictured?
No, sir.
And,
Yes, I had the Seven Habits of Highly Effective Teens book.
right, you have the book. Did you ever do the program that went with that?
No, I didn't know it had a program.
Oh, yes, there is actually. Um, so I actually did this program, and I also did something called the Leadership Challenge program out of that was what, West Virginia University. We also do a lot of work with DAFT, which is one of the two textbooks that you're utilizing as well. And then I'm dealing with this course as well that is in the Exploring Leadership textbook, which again, the textbooks are available for download on the e-classroom itself. So you don't have to go and buy these textbooks. But I mean, as an area of interest, if you go into any bookstore, especially or any on online, and you type in books and programs for leadership, you'll come up with tons of them. I actually looked at a couple of videos from the Tony Robbins series that he does. Quite interactive, interesting stuff. And each one of them tends to focus on a different application of the the leadership in the particular environments that they're looking at, and this is something that we're going to have to look at and spend a lot of time observing. So of course the one that we're looking at is yet another attempt at trying to go through some levels of present or leadership studies that we're going to be looking at across the board. Now this is a long presentation that I have here, so we have to kind of move kind of quickly with it. All right, so the problem with leadership is that it's very difficult to come to any particular one definition that is universal in nature, because leadership means different things to different people, because there's an emotional and a subjective nature to leadership, because it's about the experience you have with people who are in leadership positions, or with other people who, if you are in a leadership position, what what the nature of the relationship you have with those people. So, because people look at leadership differently, and it changes as we move around the world in terms of different countries, different cultures. They view leadership as something absolutely different across the board. So, what would be your perception? It's a question for you to reflect on, which is, what is your current perception of leadership? In a lot of instances, last week we talked about when we think of leadership, we think about politicians, we think about the leaders in our churches, we think about those kind of situations. So that makes it kind of difficult to nail down studies of leadership and kind of like defining it properly. Um, we generally tend to heap on to the leaders in our environments. Um, we want them to provide solutions for problems that we face collectively. So I have listed here a number of different problems that we face on a global scale, starting with climate change, globalization, poverty, healthcare, education. Can you think of anything else that might be more in our specific in Caribbean experience, Trinidad experience that you would tag in here as a concern that we have?
Crime.
Crime, very good. Anything else?
Infrastructure.
Correct. That's another one. Infrastructure. All right. Economic development, maybe access to jobs and access to good paying jobs. Um, Public safety, which is a broader aspect to crime, if we talk about public safety. All right. So those are some of the really interesting things. And what we would like our leaders to do is to find solutions for the problems that we face. And as we go through this, we're going to see that there is the biggest thing that happens is that when our leaders are unable to find those solutions, we start to develop a great deal of distrust and we become uninterested in what they have to say. So in other words, what happens is that it creates something called an anti-leader vaccine because people are so negative with people. They're very um, dismissive of people in leadership positions, and they tend to ridicule them. I mean, we see that all the time with the kind of memes we see online and the ridicule that a lot of leaders face as a result of, sometimes a simple fupa and it becomes this big thing. Or they make a decision, the decision is wrong, and then we start to, be very critical of them. Now, this has a repercussion because it means that the people who are best qualified to probably be in positions of leadership become less willing to take on leadership responsibilities because of the amount of negativity attached to it. Because I mean, working in a leadership position has a lot of frustration to start with. You tack on to that people's distrust, people's attitudes towards or negative attitudes towards people in positions of leadership. It creates that environment in which it discourages people who are probably best qualified and suitable for the leadership position. And what ends up happening is we start to get uh, what I like to call the lowest common denominator occurring. So only the persons who are willing to put up with the frustrations that come with leadership positions, who are not necessarily the best people for it. So you get a lot of people who are, misdirected in their thinking, not fully prepared for leadership positions, sometimes from an educational point of view, sometimes from an emotional point of view or attitudinal point of view. A lot of these people end up in positions of leadership simply because the people who are better qualified and better suited they're not willing to take on the experience. That makes sense? Yeah?
Yes,
Have you
sir.
all,
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
yeah, you all have experienced that or have you seen that in yourselves that because of the headaches, Anthony, I see your mic open. Go ahead, contribute.
No, I was going to say the same. That's true.
Yeah. In fact, you might find yourselves in situations in the future or even now where people are trying to get you to take on leadership positions, but you don't feel as if you want to take on the risk factor. So that's another element, huh, about leadership. Leadership is about taking risks, being willing to take risks, and face the disappointment, face the distrust, face the ridicule that comes with being in positions of leadership. But it's what we do with it is going to be the important element. So this is just part of the course, so to speak, that we have to face. Now, leadership has over time attracted a lot of facts and fallacies. So let's try and deal with some of the myths that the text talks about, or what the fallacies are that we speak of. So the myths about leadership are leaders are born, not made. So that's one of the first things we have to tackle. Leadership is hierarchical, and you need to have a formal position in an organization to have status to be able to be considered a leader. You have to have charisma to be an effective leader. There's one standard way of leading. So there's just a way of doing leadership. Hold a sec. Mr. Simangal, welcome. Alex. Take a note of that. All right. So yes, we're talking about the myths. So the last one we spoke about is the standard approach to leadership. That's another myth. It is impossible to be a manager and a leader at the same time, and you only need to have common sense to be an effective leader. So these are some of the myths about leadership. So what are the truths about leadership? Well, first one is leaders are made, not born. Though you might be born into families or into circumstances where you are positioned for leadership, it doesn't mean that you become a leader just because of your positioning in society, or positioning due to your family structure or your genetics. You have to hone skills to become a good leader. You need to be knowledgeable about the operations that you're getting involved with, or the situation that you're finding yourself in, and those skills have to be developed with some degree of expertise. And of course, you have to train to develop those skills and become, a better leader across the board. And that goes from just your communication styles to just simply the amount of information that you have available. Your socialization skills is another element that we have to pay attention to when it comes to leadership, because leadership, as we said, is about the relationships. So the fact that a lot of people still ascertain that leadership is something that you have to be born into, or we have this statement that comes up, a natural born leader. You might be a born leader or have leadership qualities, but if those qualities are not, um, they're not shaped, they're not encouraged, and they're not nurtured, and you bolster that with additional training and capacity, you would never achieve the type of leadership capabilities that your inherent position comes with. Similarly, people who are not born into positions that give them this natural aptitude for leadership or natural positioning for leadership situations is also, has the opportunity to arrive in positions of leadership through the training and development that they undertake through their life and through their environments. All right, so that's something that we want to dissuade with one time, because if that were the case, if leaders are born and not made, then we wouldn't have this course. In fact, this is one of the topics we're going to be debating, and you all will find arguments to support leaders are born as opposed to the argument that leaders are made. All right. So leadership occurs at all levels. This is because leadership is not something that only takes place at the top of an organization. It takes place throughout an organization. And in more progressive organizations in particular, you find that the organization tries to, as they say here, flatten hierarchies to be able to empower. So what you find is a common technique that is utilized in management and control is to create a lot of little teams in which you have a number of different leaders operating in a team's approach, because it's much easier to manage smaller groups of individuals than trying to manage an entire an entire workforce of maybe hundreds or thousands of people all at the same time. So you create these subgroupings in which you create opportunities for leaders at different levels throughout the organization, which is one of the reasons why we have a sort of hierarchical situation that's taking place. But um, good organizations encourage leadership by flattening out the organization. So rather than having distinctive people that you're always reporting upwards and downwards to, you have more lateral communication and lateral decision making. It helps to make people feel more involved in the organization, especially, and it becomes meaningful. So the work that they do is meaningful for the entire organization. And leadership is not just this. There's one person above, and you answer to that type of person who has this almost omnipotent position across the organization. How many of you all work in organizations that try to utilize this type of progressive system of leadership? Any of you all at all? Nobody? So this is unfortunate because, and it's also indicative of the nature of leadership in our current existing circumstances. Because the vast majority of leadership positions still maintain that hierarchical nature to leadership. All right? Okay. And it's not necessarily the best thing. But what we could say, therefore, is that leadership still occurs in our organizations in a very traditional manner. Yes, Awani. Ned, go ahead. Not hearing you though. Try that again. Still not hearing you.
You hearing me now? No?
Yes, I'm hearing you now. Yes.
Oh, I was just saying that my department is trying to move towards that type of
You know where you're going to get
leadership.
a lot of. All right. So where are you getting resistance for that approach?
Well, high up actually.
All right. So you're getting resistance from above, but are you also not getting some resistance from below? Because people just aren't
Yes.
accustomed to working in a situation like that.
Yes, yes.
And the reason for
Yes.
that, I remember the first time I started to utilize learner-centered approaches in my classes, and my students revolted against it because learner-centered approaches to teaching requires that students take uh, more control over their personal learning and understanding of material. And I remembered it was an uphill battle for a while until they started to get the idea that um, it was a better approach to learning because it meant the learning was more meaningful for them on a personal level. I also had my head of department at that time also tell me, no, 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 we can't use that. And some of the colleagues that I was working with questioned whether the validity of this learner-centered approach and stuff like that. And me and I was gung ho into that. And I remember there was opposition from above, opposition from my side, and opposition from below. So it felt like I was fighting a losing battle. And fortunately, I stood the test and I'm able to use this approach in almost all of my teaching areas that I've worked at so far. So, and with some level of success as well, I must say. May, I saw your hand up earlier. Was there something you wanted to contribute? Okay, so you're breaking up, so we're not understanding what you're saying. Mhm. All right. The construction sector. Okay. All right. And you're involved where on the operation side or the uh, office side? Okay. All right. Cool. One of the places that I've found this approach is employed with is in financial services. It happens a fair amount. Not so much in banking as it is. I see this approach happening a lot in insurance and financial planning, those areas, because it works better that way, I think. Banking is still very authoritative in nature because of the ramifications of money control. So there are things that we have to look at there. All right, so moving along. Charisma is not a prerequisite for leadership. I mean, charisma can help. So if you have a charismatic person with who you're working with, people feel, that there's a right. So what is charisma? Charisma is this undefinable thing about somebody with whom you have an emotional response. Now makes it tricky. So charismatic leaders have been able to elicit from people around them emotional responses and connections, so that they can convince people to do things or encourage them or motivate them easily because they're seen as being charismatic in nature. They're often seen as visionary people in the organization, who are able to paint these lofty pictures of where the organization will move in the future, or where we will all be as we move forward. The problem, however, with charisma is that it is subjective. It is not something that any person can say to you is um, the same across the board. So charisma for one individual might be revulsion for another. That's another thing. And because we're dealing with emotional responses, it can become tricky because the way in which it stimulates other people can become dangerous, especially with the level of influence that they've had on it. In fact, I can't. We will come across a number of leaders in the past who have who have been classified as being very charismatic, who have done some really negative things that we would love not to have to repeat across the board. And we'll come across some of those individuals. So Peter Drucker, another guy who writes a lot in management, spoke about three of the most charismatic leaders in the last century, inflicting the most amount of suffering on the human race, and that trio was Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. Now, for those of you who are familiar already, we talked about Hitler in the past and Stalin, both of them engaging in lots of problems and issues in Germany and during World War II. Stalin, his issues with and at the end of World War II and into the reign of the Soviet Union, that was another set of stuff that took place there. And then Mao, who came up after World War II as well. Anybody's familiar with Chairman Mao and the Chinese experience and journey into communism and what happened during his reign? Anybody's familiar with that? Or is this a part of history that you're not familiar with?
Vaguely.
All right, so it's something for you to do some reading in. There's some nice YouTube videos on the history of China and the cultural revolution that took place there, because Mao and Stalin had this similar type of mindsets, utilizing communism and socialism in their approaches to governance, but their behavior was very totalitarian in nature. So it was his way or the highway kind of thing, and um, as a result of decisions that they made, millions of people died either by the errors that they made or simply because they needed to be exterminated because they were in opposition to what was going on, or opposition to what they wanted done. So that's the danger. One of the dangers with charismatic leaders, because they didn't themselves go and kill people, right? They got other people to do the killing and other people to do the damage that they wanted, and we'll engage a lot more in that. Now we spoke about Hitler, but other charismatic leaders. So I have some negative and positive. So another charismatic leader is Mahatma Gandhi. Another one is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They use their charisma and in their leadership positions to do something good for the society around them. But Hitler didn't do anything that was. It started off as being good, in terms of German perspective at the time, but it ended up being this very dangerous thing that took place across the world and led the world into a period of world war, um, based upon what he perceived to be the right direction that they wanted to take. Anybody's familiar with this shaded pastor here? Anybody knows who he is? Nobody?
Yeah, he was the one that ran the, I think it was the cult and all the people killed themselves.
Yes, which one? There've been a number of them actually.
I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I think it was like a farm he had owned in one of them Caribbean countries.
Uh huh. Somebody mentioned his name in the background there. Who was that? Ariel?
Jim Jones.
Jim Jones?
Is that him?
Ariel, see your hand up.
So,
Shall
I
we?
was gonna say Jim Jones.
Right, and he is the Right Reverend Dr. Jim Jones. Don't forget. Very charismatic individual who led a whole set of people into the promised land in Guyana. And they had the Kool-Aid. Remember, they fed each other poison Kool-Aid, cyanide and Kool-Aid, and then people died
Oh,
en
that's where the
masse.
term comes from. Drink the
Drinking
Kool-Aid.
drinking the Kool-Aid. Oh, you don't get that? Wow. Yeah, it's become an infamous statement now. Yeah, I drank the Kool-Aid. Ariel, is something else you wanted to um, talk about or ask? Okay, all right, all right. So yeah, again, there's two sides of this charismatic leadership situation. I know charisma though does make it easier to get things done because you can convince people and they have this emotional connection to you and they become very passionate about it. But as we could see, everybody in these pictures here came to violent ends. Again, it's because there's passion related to the person both for and against. And for Jim Jones, it was self kind of doubt that created that. In all instances, you'd recognize that Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, they were both assassinated by people who opposed the position that they were taking in terms of the directions that they were leading their various countries or organizations through. So those are the things that come up as a result of being charismatic in nature. This is one of the reasons why they also talked about why JFK was also assassinated as well, because his charisma was leading to having popular support for things that they didn't want the government getting involved with. So let's leave that for now and go to the next one. There's not one right way to lead. So as we've spoken about before, is that you cannot use one approach to leadership. Um, Leadership has to utilize multiple approaches, multiple techniques, because different circumstances really dictate the type of leadership that is necessary. So the way in which you would lead is very dependent upon who you are, from basic things about your gender, your cultural identity, and your personal value structures, which is one of the things that you have to evaluate and examine in your self-assessments, right? So that's something. So again, the takeaway from this is that there's no one right way to do this thing. There are multiple techniques that can be utilized based upon the influences and the circumstances you find yourself operating in. All right, so that's fairly clear, right? All right, Brandon is coming back in. Let's make sure. Welcome back, Brandon. Right, he was here. Uh,
Momentum.
well, you missed out plenty thing.
Pressure.
All right. So we're just about talking about the fact that there is not just one right way to lead. There are multiple techniques that can be utilized, different styles, different approaches. All right, that's something that's going on. The importance of distinguishing between management and leadership. So we have to distinguish between the two, because the fallacy is that you can't be a manager and a leader. You can either be a manager or you can be a leader. The reality is that no, that's not true. Though management has a different end game or goal than leadership. So a manager is an individual who holds a directive position in an organization, presiding over the process by which the organization functions, allocates resources, and makes the best use of people. So, in essence, managers are focused on the goals and objectives of the organization, whereas leadership is a much wider ambit of behavior. Managers are bound, as we said here, to the institutional goals. So they have to be preoccupied with getting things done the way the organization sees it. So this is the last statement here. Managers are preoccupied with doing things the right way, whereas leaders are focused on doing things the right way. Sorry, I read that incorrectly. Doing things the right way, whereas leadership is focused on doing the right thing. So there's a distinction between the two of those things. So we, as a manager, your at the end of the day, your effectiveness is going to be measured by the goal outcome. So it would be profit, sales, production, whatever it is. You just have to do the things necessary to get that output, because that is what you're being assessed based on. Leadership, however, is focused on doing the right thing. So that is not necessarily an easy overlap, because a manager might be producing some of the world's worst goods and services in the world, but at the end of the day, they still have to produce it, and they're doing it the way the organization wants it done. A leader, on the other hand, would question, why are we producing these goods if they're causing this much damage to our society, or to our environment? We should stop producing these things and do the right thing, which is produce something that is beneficial to everybody, including the environment and that type of stuff. You're seeing the distinction there between the two. Can there be an overlap? Yes, of course there's a massive overlap between management decision making and leadership decision making. And where the overlap takes place primarily is when managers have to treat with the individuals with whom they are um, controlling or working with. So leaders perform management activities and leadership activities. So it doesn't mean that you can't be a leader and a manager, because the two areas overlap with each other. Because in any organization, to get things done, you'd have to do things to get it done. We call those managerial tasks. But in order to do that, you have to motivate people to want to work, to want to you know, strive for better outcomes, and be the most important or effective individual they can be. That aspect of what you do as a manager in an organization becomes the type of leadership that you exhibit among the people that you're working with. That kind of makes sense, guys? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So leadership is a
Yes, sir.
teacher. Yes. Great. Thanks a lot, Anthony. All right. So leadership is teachable. Now, obviously, this course would not be here if we didn't think that leadership is something that can be taught. We There are lots of different skills and techniques that we will learn. Different, as we talked about, self analysis. That's going to be important. We have to get involved with a lot of reflection and self examination to be able to um, evaluate who we are and make improvements, especially improvements from mistakes we've made in the past. So, leadership is not a one and done thing, it's something that develops over time. You develop your skills, you develop your aptitude towards the activity of leadership, not through a once and done kind of situation, but through trial and error in some instances, and of course learning from your mistakes and trying to improve things or make things better. All right, so let's start to look at so those are the myths about leadership that we've sort of tried to deal with. All right, that last myth had to do with um, there's you only need to have common sense. That's not true. You need a little more than common sense. And what we're talking about is reflection and training and development of your skills, learning from being involved, talking to other leaders and people in leadership positions and learning from them, from their experiences, um, sort of like vicarious learning and stuff like that. And that's one of the ways we learn generally. As a child growing up, we learn by looking at what other people do, and we work that way. So now we start to talk about leadership here in terms of definitions, and we're going to be tracing the development of leadership thought. And I found an interesting video that I would like us to look at the end of the thing. If it works properly, then if not, I'll put the link to the video. Then you all can look at it on your own at your own time. But we're looking at the development of the ideology of leadership over time. So we're going fairly far back and looking at the word itself. The word leadership or the term leader can be traced in the English language to about the 1300s. And the word leadership emerged in the 1800s and was only used or primarily used in the area of political influence. So this is, remember, where the first area of or framework in which we were looking at, where we would see or tend to see leadership taking place. There were very few formal definitions of leadership that existed from 1900 to 1929. And that's because, again, it's the fledgling beginning of looking at leadership across the board. And by the 1980s, we have about 110 definitions, primarily coming out of the areas of academic studies. We get about 221 definitions found in books and publications. Then we move to another situation where we have at least 366 publications on leadership that has no formal definition. So you have a lot of discussion about leadership, but not any clear definition of what leadership is. And we know why. Leadership is a very subjective thing, and therefore it makes it very difficult to nail down a specific definition for it. So that's going to be one of the things that we're going to be looking at. So an early definition by Mumford in the period of 06, 09, 07 in the 19th century, or the beginning of the 20th century, defined leadership as the preeminence of one or a few individuals in a group in the process of control of societal phenomena. All right, so this definition speaks to me of a master of puppets kind of thing. So it means that you had these individuals, and to a great extent, a lot of people still think about leadership from this perspective as well, that you have these people in the background manipulating things and controlling other people to do things to be able to get certain outcomes. Now, it tends to be a very nefarious approach to looking at leadership, and it's it's kind of a scary thing that we could look at. But the idea is it started at that point in time, and this is the concept that they ascribe to. So you have even during this period of time, you also had the Machiavellian approaches to leadership and kingship and stuff like that. For those of you who might be familiar with the Prince Machiavelli letters about the approach to how to be a leader during that period. So contemporary definitions describe leadership as a relational process. So when we look at leadership in today's environment, we look at it as being a relationship based upon mutual goals that we're trying to achieve. So that's what we're looking at in our current situation. But in the past, we started with one person controlling others in secret to get things done the way they want it done. So, all right. Another aspect is that there's a level of interaction between leaders and followers who work together to accomplish goals or some type of action. The interaction is based on some type of influence. So here now, we're starting to look at leadership as being some sort of influence that one person or group of people have over others, but we are working on a common objective. The interesting thing about this, though, is that this leadership also opens up the possibility that it's not only the leader influencing the followers, but by response and the way in which followers behave, it can in fact influence what leaders do. Because if you do something and it doesn't go well, then you try something else. So there's a feedback loop that comes up in this definition that is interesting for us to look at. So, um, if we look at the way leadership works in our current environments, where we work, where we go to school, our homes and stuff like that, we'd start to look at how you know how those definitions hold up. Is your home a situation where you have that puppet master approach? Hopefully not. Maybe it should be more of a relational approach. Is the place you work more along those lines of the puppet master type of approach? That's the kind of thing I want you to try to think of in the various spheres of activities that you get into. How is leadership practiced in those different environments? Some of you all, anybody here is into any sort of social groupings and stuff like that? Are you members of church groups or some sort of social group or community group that you're active with?
Yeah,
What's
church groups.
right? So, Alex, what's the type of leadership that you find occurring there?
Um, hmm, that's
How
a
would you
good question.
define it? Well, it may actually not be something that you've thought about yet, but this is food for thought for you. Evaluate the leadership. Are you a member of the leadership, or are you,
Uh,
in the group from a different perspective?
in a way, I kind of trying to be part of the leadership now.
Uh huh. That's
Mm.
good. So you have a chance to put some of the things that we're going to be dealing with here into practice.
That is actually why I wanted to take this course.
All right, good, excellent. So hopefully we could start to see you put it to use ASAP. Hopefully we'll
Yeah,
do it fast enough for you, right? All
but
right,
that is something I actually never thought about before, so I think I'll have to think about it first.
right. Look at the nature of the leadership as it exists within the organization at all levels, not only in the youth group, but also what's happening in the main group and the senior parts of the organization. This is a
Yeah,
church organization, right?
yeah, technically, yeah, yeah,
A faith-based organization, right? Well, so I
yeah.
should I should broaden my perspective. Right. So in faith-based organizations, there's a great tendency to develop a youth arm. There's a senior arm, but they're all connected to one primary key area. Um, but they use different techniques across the board. So anybody else has any similar experience or a different experience altogether?
Yes, sir. I'm part of the Northwest Regional Chapter for the credit unions.
Uh huh. And what type of role do you play?
I'm the vice president on it.
Wow. So you're a huge leader. So what do you all do? What's your primary function and purpose?
We throw different events and stuff like that tell young people how to manage their finances, tell them about saving, teach them world of work. Um,
All right.
we
So
even throw like
all
smaller
right.
events like um, we'd have like football games
So
and
primarily
sports.
your organization is some sort of social reach out for the union. Is it credit union movement?
Yeah, it's a great union movement.
All right. So do you know what your clear mission and visions are?
In terms of, well, we are focused mainly on the North region.
Right. That's your
So in
area of
terms of,
focus. But what is your
yeah,
vision? So I'm asking you these questions because
so
these
it's
are the
just
things. Sorry.
it's kind of to make people a little more aware of what we offer in terms of saving plans.
Right. Well, financial services. Let's broaden that a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. And the probability for investment. And she's
Mm-hmm.
right because the earlier you get working on that, as you begin your employment history, the better off you'll be in the long run. All right. There are some things that I would like you, as we start to move through the course, you should be able to evaluate these organizations that you belong to in the context of this leadership studies that we're going to be going through. So that's something that we I'd like to see you all reflect on as well as evaluate the organizations you're in, the that you're participating in. All right. Now we already spoke about the various fields such as anthropology, psychology, and so on. But one of the approaches that emerged in our time frame is not to separate the influences or the frameworks, but to actually look at it from an interdisciplinary type of approach. So there are things from the political field, the anthropology field, and we try to pull them together because it gives us a broader perspective of what actual leadership is about as practiced in day-to-day activities around us. There's no one correct definition, so that we've come to this broad conclusion. And this causes us to ask that question: what is the purpose of leadership? And the purpose of leadership is what helps us to define it a little clearer. Because as we move from one circumstance or situation to another, the context in which leadership is being practiced clearly impacts upon the way in which we operate, as well as how we would define our role in that organization. So those are the things that are key for us to evaluate. Now, in trying to define leadership, the approach was to use a metaphoric approach, which is basically to compare leadership to something that people are already familiar with. So you might be familiar, for example, with the consensus approach to leadership. Consensus meaning the individual, the ability to find consensus among diverse members of a group. So the majority, um, well, it goes a little beyond majorities, trying to convince everybody in the organization to follow the even though you might initially oppose the idea, you are able to convince people to want to follow you and help make that whatever decision that you've made to move forward in that. The competitive market metaphor is really about in comparing leadership to the marketplace, where the leader in the market emerges as that person that has the most amount of success in the form of like sales, profits, and so on. So there are all these different metaphors that are utilized to be able to try and help to define what leadership is. The this one here, the last one that has this weird name, I always have problems with this. Plebiscite, plebiscitary. Wow, saying that wrong. Um, is actually voting, although it's autocratic. It means, however, wherever the vote sits, that's where we have to go. So we vote on a circumstance, and we have 60% saying we're going direction A, then it becomes autocratic because regardless of what the rest of the 40% have to say, we're going in this direction. So that's a different methodology that is utilized, as opposed to a democratic system where you might use a little more consensus and convincing people to want to buy into this particular direction. Those are some of the things that you could look at. Now, one that I actually found was really nice was the concept of leadership as an orchestra. Did I hear a clink there? Kadugan. Hi, Kadugan. Welcome. Oh, welcome back, I should say. All right. Um, so let's think about it from the perception of from this picture. In this image here, we can see that the person in the middle, the conductor, is in charge of various people operating different instruments, all with different voices or different sounds, and is trying to blend these sounds together using a common language of music. So this is a really interesting image that allows us to use that metaphoric definition of music. Now, Dupree used this and kind of made it a little smaller. Welcome back, Simon. All right. By instead of going with the entire orchestra, he goes with a jazz musician. So jazz musicians don't have a very broad selection of players. You have maybe a 5 piece or 6 piece band. But think about these things that the band leader has to do. They have to choose the music, they have to find the right musicians, and they have to perform. But that performance, the effectiveness of that performance is not only dependent on the leader, but also on things that might be outside of the leader's control, the environment in which they're playing, the people in the band and their willingness to actually perform at their best. All right. And not only to perform from an individual standpoint, but to also to mesh as a group. So everybody is dependent on everybody else within the unit to be able to get the best output. Now, this brings me to a question. Any of you guys have played in a band or ever took part in some kind of musical activity or play an instrument? Anybody?
No, sir.
No musicians here, boy? Wow.
Yeah.
Yes, Awani and Simangal. Right. So tell Alex, tell us about your experience. What do you work in, or what genre of music do you play?
Uh, uh, Guitarist.
In
Learning to
what learning to play in what environment?
what type of music you mean?
Yeah,
Gospel mainly.
gospel. All right, cool. So are you involved with a church organization, playing
Yeah.
things?
I play in song service.
All right, good. So you all have rehearsals and stuff like that.
Yeah, we had one just yesterday actually.
All right, yeah, I find that a unique time frame. So if you look at this definition here, do you see it? Does it make sense to you? Or you no, sometimes it's hard as a musician to listen well, have you all ever recorded the band or the performances?
Uh, kind of. Well, technically, yeah, because we stream it live on
Right.
YouTube.
So have you ever um, gone back and listened to your performance not as an individual but as the unit, the whole group?
Uh, I don't know. I know I don't think so.
All
More
right.
more individually, in my opinion, to see what I was doing.
Right. And that's something that a leader would have to do. So whoever the band leader is, they would have to be evaluating what's taking place in terms of the final output. For you as the guitarist, your output is what your contribution was. But from the position of the band leader and for the audience, it is what you all as a unit put together and how you all were able to bring expressiveness to music and perform and you know performed in a manner that made it pleasing and acceptable for us to listen to. You follow?
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
how many people make up your unit?
I'd say one, two, three, four, about 6 to 8 of us.
All right, all musicians, or you have vocalists involved as well?
Nah, that's all musicians. Well, we have in our song service 3 musicians, and most of the rest is just singers.
All right. So you have people who are the backbone of the music. So I take it guitar, keyboards, bass, drums, or something like that.
Yeah, piano, drums.
Okay. So you have synth drums then, program
Yeah.
drums. Okay, that sucks. You all should get a real drummer. Just a plug for drummers around the world. All right. Thanks a lot for sharing, Alex. Anybody else wanted to share their experiences with playing music in groups? I saw some hands come up.
Yes, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
I I, I also play in church
Uh huh.
um, with my group. Mainly all what my colleague just said. Yeah, same church group and so.
Uh-huh.
One thing I wanted to note though, after we would have developed that synergy with each other and
Right.
understanding what each other play and so, when someone new, so let's say we are in church playing and a musician visits and he wants to play, sometimes it's very hard to play along with him because he does not understand the style or because every musician have a different
Approach.
style they
Yeah.
would play certain things.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it gets difficult playing with someone new because
I always
you're
look at
not
that
accustomed. Yeah,
as an exciting opportunity to learn,
yeah, it is. It is.
but it can be
But
frustrating.
yes,
Yeah, that's interesting take on it. Um, and it's because we develop a sense of comfort with each other. So as a musician, we find comfort with each other, and we can kind of hide in between the notes, if you understand what I mean.
yes, that
Um,
is true.
and it means that I know I have a deficiency here, but my colleague who's playing this instrument could make up for what I'm missing here, and that and that's the sign of a good team. A good team is able to complement each other.
That's
um,
actually 100% true. So in my case, I
mhm,
know whenever if I struggling with something or mess up by mistake while song service going on,
right.
there's always someone either on the piano or the drums to keep on going to make sure
Correct.
everything goes smoothly.
Yeah, and that's the sign of a good band. That doesn't come overnight. That takes time. That takes a lot of working with each other and understanding each other and communicating with each other, not necessarily through words, but through looks and gestures and listening out for each other. That's really good, and that takes time to develop. How long you been
Yeah.
active with the band, Alex?
Since February, but I started practicing and learning since last year, July. Yeah.
So you fairly new in guitar playing.
Yeah, kind of.
Wow.
Because
Okay, that's interesting. All right, good.
I had a kind of, I learned kind of quick though, which I was very glad that I did.
Right. So it means you have good hand-eye coordination. That's good. All right. Sounds interesting. Things to talk to you about. All right, but everybody's getting this definition, metaphoric definition about leadership defined in the context of musicians. Because if you've ever had to work, anybody played pan, steel pan at all? Because that qualifies easily here. Anybody ever played in a pan side? Right. We have. I see a couple hands went up. Ariel,
Yes,
Miss
sir, I did. I
Regis.
did.
Yeah, that's a really interesting experience because across the board you have different voices coming up. So tell me about your experiences, guys. Um, I think Miss John had her hand up. How did you all feel about it? What was the context in which it took place?
So,
Yeah,
this is Ramon. Good afternoon.
I
So I
Ramon.
grew up playing piano in church and stuff.
Uh
And
huh.
then when I was like primary school to secondary school, I branched off into pan and was playing with a pan side actually, but not 100% of the way, but I just started basically.
All right, good. And how do you find the experience as opposed to playing in the church?
Um, in church is more individualistic, it's more community, but in pan and like in a pan side, it's tougher because you have to actually be quicker on like whatever you're learning, whatever the music is, whatever the piece is, you have to be quicker on it, Joe. You have to be
Yeah.
more in depth in terms of knowing your notes, knowing how to your progressions and stuff like that.
Right, and that's because, as with anything in a group-based activity, you're as good as your worst player. You understand what I mean by that, right?
Yes, sir, we do.
The
Yeah.
entire unit
That's
is
that's
will
true.
only be as good as the worst player in the group. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. Something, and that's something for us to think about from broader group activities. Huh? Um, for any group to be successful, we have to make sure that all the members of the group is functioning at their very best. And the only way that can happen is by the group working together to bring each other up. We don't just throw people on the wayside. We bring each other up and get us all ready for that. All right, so this jazz definition was something that was really important, and Dupree talked about the jazz metaphor as being a powerful illustration of inclusiveness, valuing individuality, showing the importance of the public good. Because if you think about a band performing in a public environment, we are producing something that the public is consuming, and they would only want to consume it and want more if it's pleasing for everybody. And of course, inside of doing that, we just spoke about this, is empowering the others in the organization, in the group, in the band, to be the very best, helping them to achieve their talent and their things, laying that platform and support for other people to grow and to become better musicians in that environment. Okay, Miss Phipps, and I see something in the chat. I okay, um, Miss Harry. Okay, I understand. No problem. If Harry's back here, yeah, I know net activities will create that. So this is one of the reasons why this metaphor is such a great one, because it really does speak to the complexity of what leadership is all about and how leadership works with other people and the relational issues that it brings to bear in terms of what's going on. All right. So here we're talking about the metaphor of leadership as an episodic affair. So it means simply that as a leader doesn't mean if you're a leader in an organization, it doesn't mean you engage in leadership activities every second of every day, or every minute that you're at work or within the environment in which you're working in. Episodic means that leadership takes place in spurts and small time frames. When you are working in the office, for example, and you're working on timesheets and you're dealing with your paperwork, answering emails and stuff like that, that's not necessarily leadership activity. That's more managerial, operational activities that you're getting involved with. But a member of staff comes in and has a chat with you, and they're having some problems, and you're helping them to work through their issues or problems. That's leadership in action, because you're helping to deal with the individual. You're furthering your relationship with the person. You have a meeting with the group, and you're engaging with them in probably launching some new concept, new idea, new thing that you bring in. That's a leadership activity. So here they keep on talking about it. Leadership is an activity that's episodic in nature. So it's not happening every second of every day that you are in and around the people that you're working with, but it takes place in very what we call time specific positions, place specific, context specific, and individuals will experience that leadership in episodic moments. All right, so we just talked about this. Leadership does not occur routinely in people's lives during every moment that they're working or volunteering in the community. It's 10 minutes here, 15 minutes here. That's what they mean by that. So that's a pretty good thing here. So let's look at the leadership theories, and this is where we're going to be spending a fair amount of this evening with looking at the emergence of leadership theories over time. And I'm going to add a little more in terms of looking at the background to some of these things here. So we've already come to the conclusion that leadership is not a simple thing. It's a complex, and um, it's a complex idea or concept, and it is elusive in nature because we still have to define all of the things. It's multidisciplinary in its nature, because it calls upon a lot of different approaches for us to really get an understanding of what true leadership is all about. And it has to be examined primarily through the relational elements of what is taking place between individuals and the people around them. So we're going to be looking a lot at what behavioral science did in relation to the development of these leadership theories that have come up. So we're going to be evaluating them in terms of looking at some of their criticisms as to why they may have, gone the way of the dodo, as they speak, and basically we have to think about the context in which these theories were developed as well. So This is some of the elements that we're going to be looking at. So these are some of the theories that we're going to be looking at, tracking through historically. So the great man approach, influence theories, trait approach, sorry, reciprocal leadership theory, behavior theory, behavioral approaches, I should say, chaos theory, and situational contingent approaches. So let's start to examine this a little bit, and we'll get cracking with it. Hopefully, we'll be finished in a little while. So, one of the first theories that emerged was the great man approach, and again, this was based upon the concept that you had to be born a leader, and great people um, became the leader. So Darwinistic thinking dominated this theory in the sense that anybody who recalls who Darwin is and what theory he had that was predominant in the early 19th century, or the early late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century.
Evolution, sir.
Yes, and there was some other aspect to it. Evolution, and there's another part. Natural what? Natural
Relativity.
natural selection. No. So Darwinist thinking was about evolution and natural selection, and at the end of the day, the strongest will survive, right? Those that are able to adapt to the changing environment are those the ones that will survive and become the predominant organism or species that will survive. So Darwinistic thinking, coming from this evolution theory, looked upon great man theory as being the assumption that leadership is hereditary in nature, and only people who come from with these characteristics can be treated as being these the the leaders in the organization. And a lot of the theory of great man came from, as they have it here, the folklore is based upon brothers of a reigning king who were ascribed to have abilities of power and influence, and is believed that the intermarriage of the fittest would produce an aristocratic class superior than the lower classes. So let's deal with that thing here. So that is fraught with a lot of issues, um, primarily because the main idea is one. This was a lot of this kind of occupied a lot of people's minds back in the day, in the sense that leadership was the determined by your bloodline. So a king could only become a king if they were born of a king. Made sense? Everybody kind of follow that? So in order to maintain the purity of that bloodline, it meant that they had to intermarry. Basically, they kept that bloodline in a particular, in a particular manner. That, of course, is, as we know, intermarrying with people who are close in relationship leads to a great level, a great amount of problems from a genetic point of view. And people, oftentimes who interbreed generate uh, uh, serious brain damage and sometimes physical damage in the children that come up. And in fact, their genes are weakened over time. So the concept was that men, and only men, who emerged in a position of power can maintain that lineage by making sure that their blood runs in the veins of those people who came after them, and only those people with that bloodline would be able to hold positions of power. If you think of the analogy of King Arthur, King Arthur was the blood king. So if you understand how that works, only the person with King Arthur's blood in it would have been able to draw the sword from the stone. And so that was where this whole concept of great man ascribes. Now, if there were unfortunately great women that arose in history, we just simply ignored them because they just didn't prove the theory. Okay, so we just had to just ignore those things. So that obviously This theory just lasted for a bit, but it did influence a lot of thinking during that time frame. That you had to be born into leadership. Your family determined your lot in life, where your family name was. That was what was at the basis or the genesis of leadership. So, in realizing that that wasn't really the only the case, so by the 1900s, that theory gave way to something called trait theory. And in the traits approach, basically what they were saying is that there was a certain particular types of characteristics that somebody needed to have in order to be a leader. And for those of you who might be interested in what the traits were, we'd have to, I can illustrate them for you. You had to be male, you had to have a particular height, you had to be good looking according to the standards, which meant that you couldn't be blemished by anything but being Caucasian in nature. Blonde hair, blue eyes. So it's kind of get the idea of what's going on. So you had to be attractive. You had to have some level of physical strength. You couldn't be obese. Those are the things that they would call upon that the leader must have in order to, well, an individual must have in order to be classified as a leader or have leadership potential. So the problem with this theory, however, is that um, of course they had to have intelligence, height, self-confidence, and differentiated them from non-leaders, and thus made them successful. The problem is in collecting data about these traits, no definitive list was ever been able to produce by the end of the time frame that they were looking at here, and that then, so this traits theory gave way to behavioral approaches to leadership. So we're going to start evaluating here. Now, we have to remember now the great man theory and the traits theory came up, just at the end of the 18th century into the 19th century. So we're thinking about here the era of kings, all right, and male dominance in society. And interestingly enough, one of the things that also comes to mind here is a great deal of racism because only white people could be leaders. So therefore, when for example they went into Africa and met kings and queens who are African and not white in nature, they were anomalies that were simply ignored by the studies that were taking place, simply because they didn't fit the theory that they had. So this was something that happened a lot in science at that, well, pseudoscience as it was, or social sciences at the time. You simply just ignored the things that didn't fit into what your thinking was. So contextually, they reflected what the attitudes were at that time, and we'll see this happen time and time again with the models that are developed. So when we start to look at the behavioral approaches, what they were looking at here was what are the behaviors of the people who were in leadership positions that then made them good or bad. All right. So in essence, what they were going to be looking at was when you are working and you're operating as a manager, what were the things that you were doing that made you good or made you bad kind of situation. So effective and ineffective leaders were compared to be able to determine what was the difference between the two. So, um, interestingly, here this was psychology was driving this movement here because again, psychology is looking at individual behavior to be able to. So, if we observe successful and compare them with unsuccessful leaders, and we look at what they were doing, then we may be able to speak a little broadly about the whole group of leadership. So again, they were trying to utilize small experiments to say something about the overall situation. So Ohio State University and the universities of Michigan studies produced two particular models. So the one here they talked about consideration and initiating structure. So these are two behaviors where consideration was described as the degree to which a leader acts in a friendly and supportive manner to his subordinates. And initiating is the types of actions that are taken by a leader um, towards the attainment of the goals of the organization. So the two dimensions are seen to be independent of each other And therefore, basically, what they were saying, everything that the leader did that was organizational in nature in terms of achieving the goals was observed, and everything that they did that showed any form of concern and consideration for the people around whom they worked, they started to kind of make the observations and say, okay, they did this and they did that, and they did this particular thing 6 times for the day, and this type of thing 3 times for the day of per session and that kind of stuff. So think about a psychologist who's observing you in the office or on the factory floor in particular. This is really where it took place. With a checkboard and with a pencil, and they have this piece of paper, and they're making these check marks and making observations day in day out to kind of get these ideas and classifying what is initiating and what's considering, and sort of trying to make a list of all of these behaviors that would make somebody a better leader or poor leader depending upon what they were observing. So Blake and Morton utilized what they call a two-factor approach: concern for people and concern for productions. So it's just a different way of saying the same thing. Concern for people would be those actions that indicated they were doing something because it showed some sort of concern with the individuals in the organization. Concern for production would be those actions that they saw was geared towards increasing their output or getting production sorted out. So, and again, what they were doing was looking at their number of times they did any particular type of actions and sort of kind of marking it off. Then we had a different theory coming from the Michigan studies. They actually started to identify, rather than just two, which we call a bivariate measurement tool, which is there's just two variants of two variables that we're looking at. Here we started to go into a multivariate, or this system here. They look at task-oriented behaviors, relational-oriented behaviors, and participative leadership. So they're looking at three different things now, and it's the same thing: going in and observing which behaviors did they engage in the most, and what would therefore start to give an idea of what they did, being and counting how many times you do it could give advice to other people as well. If you do X percentage of your time doing this and X percentage of the time doing that, then you'll be able to do that. So again, the problem with these theories, however, is that one, they're too simplistic, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to break down leadership into one or two, or in one case, three different categories of behaviors, and you're using very simplistic methods to try and look at something that's really critical or problematic. The other thing that the approach looked at, or the techniques that they looked at, is that they didn't take into consideration the circumstances under which the behaviors that they were observing was being operated in. So context became problematic. Without surprise, from in hindsight now we could say this, the results proved to be inconclusive and inconsistent, meaning that you couldn't really say one thing or the other. And as they made observations through different parts of the country and different industries, the results weren't consistent. You couldn't get the same type of things coming up in different places. So obviously that theory kind of went away, as trying to explain what was going on. Then you had situational contingency approaches. So these approach now determine that, okay, we have to pay attention to the circumstances in which these leaders were operating, because that then kind of dictated a bit more about the behaviors of the managers or the leaders operating in that particular context. So context became critical for them to look at. So how therefore they spent a lot of time evaluating how leadership changed from one circumstance to another. So here we're talking about leadership in an industrial organization. Let's say they're working on manufacturing cars, for example, as opposed to a leader operating in maybe on a farm, another place working in an office environment. And the circumstances, as they changed, they started to try and look at what was the impact that the situation was now having on the behaviors of the leaders operating in those environments. So, in essence, therefore, they were trying to pull together some degree of theory that described, in a general sense, how the circumstance impacted upon the behavior of leaders. The problem was that, as we'll see, so we had two theories that emerged coming out of this study. You had something called the least preferred coworker model. This was mid 60s, and so we're talking mid 60s here. So we're talking 50s into the 60s, and here we're talking about an explosion of industrialization. So the mainstay of production was coming in these factory types of settings. So this is the context in which you're going to be finding a lot of these studies took place during that period of industrialization where you had a lot of factory floor operations taking place. So in a lot of instances, what they were really observing was what is taking place at the time on the factory floors. And those circumstances will then try to determine what was happening with leaders and subordinates during this period of time, and therefore what type of traits would be necessary, what types of behaviors would be necessary. So they're still falling back on some of the things. The second one that they looked at here was the path goal theory, originated in 1957 by Giorgio Poulos. So basically, what he's saying in this theory, because I have to move a little faster, because we do have quite a number of slides. This basically is the behaviors of leaders who help. All right, so there were two things. In order for a member to become productive, you had to make the path to their personal goals coincide with the goals of the organization. The effectiveness of the leader would be improved if they are able to make that overlap so that the leader helps the person in to see that performance in the job will help them achieve that um, personal goal. So what in essence this is beginning of is motivational theory. If you want to, own this house or own this car, then you need to work hard here and get this done, because then you will get the income that you would need to be able to buy the house, buy the car, live the lifestyle that you want to do. So the idea was to link the personal objectives of the individual with the organizational objectives of high levels of production and profitability. So that was the connectivity in terms of the path goal theory. So that in essence, you want to link the path of the individual to their success with the path to the organizational success through the achievement of those goals. So that was kind of basically what they were looking at there. Um, so again, coming out of these theories, there was a lack of supporting research. So again, observing these things was problematic. Social sciences was still developing during this period, and of course, the findings were very, limiting in nature, and was fraught with inconsistencies across the board. And so, eventually, these types of this contingency-based theory kind of fell to the wayside because it wasn't proving itself to be of any use. So then we start to come on to influence theories. So um, it well, Max Weber or Weber, depending upon how you want to pronounce it, um, started to look at influence theories. My bad. He first started to look at it in 1924, and then again resurfaced in 1947. No, this is because influence theories really center around charisma. And why 1924, 1947 is because it was, first off, his work was interrupted by World War II. And more importantly, during that period, he spent a lot of time observing um, the charismatic leaders that rose during that period. So Churchill, Hitler, those individuals were part of the study that he started to look at. And these influence theories became kind of popular during that period because this is where they started to make the connection between the charismatic nature of the individuals in leadership positions and the impact they had on the followership. And that was something that they had to pay attention to. Weber noted that people or leaders with charisma had a really uncanny impact upon followers. And he was able to determine that followers would do things that they would not necessarily do on their own without in the absence of this charismatic individual there. Now, back in and so after Weber was kind of done with his work, especially after World War II, we had this other fellow, Robert House, getting involved, and he started to propose this theory of charismatic leadership. Now, there's a lot of things that they were looking at here in terms of developing a set of variables that they could evaluate and test, which is important in terms of development of theory. So, charisma is attributed to leaders not by themselves but by people. I can't say I have charisma. People have to tell me I'm charismatic. That's the nature of what it is. And because somebody is seen to be charismatic, the impact on is measured through what I am able to get other people to do based upon the charisma they attribute to me. So again, it's a give and take situation, but again, it's personal or subjective in nature, and it's emotive, which is bordering on that element that makes it dangerous for usage. So several theories were posited, um, and it was seen that charismatic leadership had more impact in times of crisis, especially where the people in the general population would be willing to challenge what is seen as the status quo. So this is interesting because in the 1940s you had the civil rights movement coming up, and during that period, charismatic leaders rose to the front. We talked about Medgar Evers. I spoke about him, I think, with this class. He was one of those charismatic leaders in the black community, the American black American community, or the American African American. I don't know not sure what the PC term these days, but you had Medgar Evers, you had Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, you had Malcolm X, and you had a host of these leaders arising in this situation and were ascribed charismatic characteristics or charismatic types of attraction, followership that became more available simply because they were challenging what the existing culture was, so challenging the status quo. So in their studies what they found was that when things are going wrong in society, oftentimes a charismatic person can rise to the forefront and become the focal point of a country or a culture shifting and changing. So we're talking about the 70s here, and um, this is important because the 70s is where we got Jim Jones, Dr. Jim Jones. Um, so they had this sort of like outpouring of a lot of charismatic people who led people down to do a lot of different things, including the president of the United States at that time, John F. Kennedy, prior to the 70s. And so you had examples of charismatic leadership working towards good things and negative things. I mean, we just came out of speaking about Hitler as another charismatic leader who did really bad things. And then we talked about Mao and we talked about Stalin. But they're two sides of the same coin. So that is part of the problem with charismatic leadership. And again, it wasn't easy to measure things when we're dealing with charisma. We started to note things about charismatic leadership. That when there is major change in the air, charismatic leadership becomes almost like a significant the significance of a charismatic leader becomes more critical during that type of time frame. So that's something that we have to pay attention to. And the problem with it is that once there's this almost fanatical relationship between followers and charismatic leaders, it oftentimes leads to individuals, um, giving support to somebody for things that are nefarious in nature. So, too much deference to individual leaders by followers can create a dangerous scenario where leaders misuse their power or deliver a vision with an empty dream. This has been, um, things that they would ascribe to people like Hitler and Stalin and Mao and such. All right, those are things that I do want to pay attention to there. All right, so we understand this charismatic leadership and the inherent critical dangers. So this is why the theory is there. It's for us to be able to look at and the impact of charisma, stay of understanding overall leadership. Then we started to do in the 70s reciprocal leadership theories. And this will focus on the nature of the relationship between leaders and followers. Now, you'd see that this kind of movement started in the 1970s. Now, what was taking place in the 1970s in the largest, like the United States and England? Anybody can tell me?
Racism.
No, no. That I mean, there was, yes. I would say no, but at the same time, that's not what I'm talking about. What was happening in society in the late 60s into the 70s? Anybody? You all ever remember the, well, so the phrase would be, what's the scene, going on then? Um, so you all remember flower power, free love, the Vietnam War, all that stuff going on there, freedom movement.
Some of it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. The introduction of birth control led to sexual freedom of women. You had the strengthening of the women's liberation movement during this period. So it was a time when people and togetherness was a really important focal point. So reciprocal leadership theories developed during this period of the flower power, the this we are all one kind of movement, and you know we together, all of us leaders and followers, get things done. So the reciprocal leadership theories evolved in that time frame in the latter part of the 60s into the 70s, where this movement, especially among youth, um, was really, and of course there was a lot of drug use and acid dropping and stuff like that was going on during this period, like people getting high and having fun basically. um, any of you all ever looked at Forrest Gump, that film?
Yes, sir,
Yes, sir.
yes.
Yeah, have a look at it
Once.
once. Have a look at it again because it kind of goes through this time frame of the Vietnam war and what was going on in the States, and it took place in England as well too. You also had the civil rights movements that came up as well during the 40s, 50s, and 60s. That was part and parcel of this whole thing because people were developing an awareness that, listen, the world, the status quo is not the way it ought to be. People are being infringed upon their rights and so on. So you had a movement that gave rise to a feeling that found itself, I've at least from what I've seen here, um, leading to the development of leadership theories that kind of followed suit. So they emphasized the theories, then emphasized mutual goals and motivation of both followers and leaders, and it elevated the importance of the role of the follower in the leadership process. So this is where we start to basically, as I say, flip the script kind of thing, and the focus is not so much on the leader as it is the follower, the importance of the followers. These theories posited that leadership is not just something that the leader does to followers. Rather, leadership is a process that meaningfully engages leaders and participants values the contributions of participants, shares power and authority between leaders and participants, and establishes leaders as an inclusive activity among interdependent people. So, this is where the focus started to shift from primarily on the leader to leaders and followers and that relationship. Yes, Anthony.
So just a question, so is there a reason why I'm not seeing the screen again, or everybody, or it's just me, or is it other individuals?
I don't know. It might be you. Anybody else having that problem?
Yes, sir. It's
No,
just
sir.
black.
Yes, sir.
All right, hold on. Let me.
So I was seeing it normal though.
No, no, I just took it down. So hold on a second. Um, all right, see if it returned there, Anthony.
No, I still not seeing it.
Okay, let me try this and I'll stop sharing and
So,
then
but it's
share
not
again.
accurately both, because some of us seeing it.
I know it's probably something to do with him, but I just want to give him a chance. I'm refreshing my screen, Anthony. See if it comes back up.
Yes, sir, I've seen it now.
All right. What it may be is your bandwidth is losing some of the things. So something to pay attention to. It happens sometimes. All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
no
So
problem.
all right. Thanks a lot, Anthony. All right. So in essence, what we're talking about here is in this the nature of these theories, they focus now on trying to look at the followership and what it does and the importance of people working together becomes critical. And it's not only focused on the leader himself or herself, as the case might be. All right. So some of the main theories that arose in that period was the transforming leadership theory, which focused a lot on transformational leadership, the servant leadership theory, and the followership theory. All three basically are really going to look at the same thing. Servant leadership is and transformational leadership are two concepts that some of your chapters will cover in a lot more detail than I will deal with here. So the transformational leadership theory was formulated by Burns. In 78, he defined transformational leadership as a process where leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of morality and motivation. Oh, and this was something else that actually became critical during this period of time. A lot of people became very distrustful of leaders because of failed ethical decision making. And that therefore started to bring up a really heavy focus on ethical behavior, moral behavior. Um, so that and it really focused on we have to hold each other up to the standards, that basically leaders appeal to followers higher ideals, moral values such as liberty, justice, equality. So you didn't follow a leader um, because you liked them or they were charismatic, but because they stood for values that you saw as being important. That's why they talk about higher ideals, moral values such as liberty, justice, equality, peace, humanitarianism, not to the lesser emotions such as fear, greed, jealousy, or hate. Now, that's something that we kind of have a problem with now. Because if you look at the way in which a lot of politicians, for example, try to get people to support them is by the fear of the opposition or the other side. All right, if you think about that, and that's really a poor way to try and encourage people to support you or to join you. It's a really negative type of methodology that is utilized, but oftentimes effective. I'm not saying that it doesn't work, but um, it really does speak to the type of leadership that you're going to be getting in terms of somebody who's simply trying to ensure that they get in at all costs kind of situation. All right. So this theory is based upon the inability of the leader and the follower to be separated from each other. We have to understand that, at least from this position of this theory, is that everything in this theory is about us working together, and there can be no leader without followers, nor followers without leader. We're totally dependent on each other. There's a mutual relationship between everybody that's working in the organization. So this is the concept or the idea that they keep on talking about here in terms of the transformational or the transforming leadership theory. All right. And the idea here is also that we will engage in such a way to ensure that the individuals that are following are empowered enough to become leaders themselves. That's another element that that's going to come up. And we're not only looking at the followers to lift the leader up, um, but we're trying to lift everybody up, not just one individual becoming, important or significant in the movement. All right. So again and again, in doing so, we are holding each other, both leaders and followers are holding each other up to high levels of ethical conduct and behavior. And again, this became problematic because of things like what happened with Nixon in the United States and in Britain to a lesser extent. You had a sort of falling or failing by leaders that people became suspicious of the leadership around them, and therefore they were looking for people who will be you know better leaders, ethical in nature and so on. These are some of the leaders or leadership periods that we talk about here that come to mind. Well, I spoke a lot about JFK because he was transformational in nature. Lincoln, he transformed their society away from slavery into the system that began with the genesis of the civil rights movement. You had JFK with the famous words, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for the country." That was a transformational position. Mahatma Gandhi, he got involved in the liberation of India from the British Empire. JFK, of course, sorry, not JFK, Martin Luther King, here in terms of the civil rights movements. You had Roosevelt here, who dealt with the transformation of the economy coming out of the Great Depression. That was something that was really important because he sort of transformed the way in which government worked in the United States in terms of dragging the country out of really bad economic period for coming from the great crash in the 1920s, or the latter part of 1929, and the Great Depression of the 1930s in the United States and around the world, interestingly. And of course, we have Mother Teresa, who's also transformational in the view of sacrifice of self for other people. Those are the kind of things that we're talking about there. All right. So transformational leadership is contrasted to transactional leadership, which is another type of leadership that Burns talked about. Simply because transactional leadership is more of a sort of well, transactional nature of it, but it tends to be more pragmatic in its approach because it's motivational in nature. If you do X, then you get Y. So again, that whole transactional approach to the way in which management and leadership worked was being superseded by the transformational leadership methodology, where we didn't trade for getting things done via small transactions, but we inspired each other to do better, to get involved, to take up initiatives. That's the difference between transactional and transformational. And the act of doing that simply says that transformational leadership is supposedly better than transactional. Now, this is another debate topic that we have available for us to argue in the debates, whether or not transformational or transactional leadership is superior than the other. So we'll see when you all get to that. All right. Interestingly enough, the theory says that you can be both. You can be both transactional and transformational. Sometimes using a transactional methodology, and we spoke about this already. Different circumstances call for different styles of leadership, and whereas you could utilize transformational for massive change in the organization. So, problem with the theories basically, um, lack of focus, lack of clarity, and lack of being specific, or lack of specificity. That becomes problematic because you can't nail things down properly. All right, servant leadership theory. Again, these are all part of the relational stuff that we're talking about. So servant leadership theory again positions the leader as a servant who is serving the to the benefit of the followers, with the focus of pulling or elevating followers to themselves become leaders. So in essence, that's what servant leadership is. We do what is necessary as a leader to provide the resources, the motivation, and everything necessary to empower the others around us to become the leaders themselves. All right, so that's the Greenleaf model that we talk about. So here you have a situation where CEOs, staff, directors, and trustees all play a significant role in holding their institution in trust for the greater good of society. So that's another thing. Not only the leader serving the other people in the organization, but they're also serving the wider society. So again, whatever we do, we are trying to make sure that the entire world benefits from what we do, and there's a reciprocal nature to that relationship. So if we do things that are good for the society, and we do things that are good for everybody else, then it should come back around that the organization should benefit from that energy that you put out there, kind of thing. Again, coming from during that period where we're talking about energy flows and that type of stuff. The flower power movement, and what you put out is what you get into the environment, that type of stuff. Um, so again, we another form of this servant leadership is something called stewardship. So there's another model called or stage in the development of servant leader to be the steward. So again, it's the same thing, where we, as a leader, we are serving or being stewards for the next generation of leaders. We are empowering those around us to take on positions of leadership to walk us into the future. So it's almost like succession planning that you're thinking about here. But the focal point is that you are serving. Now, this is a technique in leadership that was attempted here in this country by I think it's um, the Prime Minister Kamala Prasad Bisesa at one point in time. But the problem is that servant leadership is not something that is ingrained in our politics here. If you remember when she took power, I can't remember when, she came on and she kept on talking about the focus of her government is to serve the people of the country. Um, Unfortunately, though it was a really good idea, because I remember she had gotten some American consultants in with her to help pull together her look and her plans and whatnot. Um, the the focal point of service is something that's a bit lost on Trinidadian politicians or Caribbean small island type of politicians, because one of the first things that happen when people arrive in positions of power is that they start to seek their own interests first, and that unfortunately seems to still hold. Regardless of how much people have accumulated, they still want more, which is the nature of humans. We as humans always will want more. Interestingly enough, and as an economist, it's we refer to it as the inability of being able to satisfy all the needs and wants of society, because as you get more, you want more. Interesting there. All right. So again, at the end of the day, the servant and the servant leadership model and the stewardship model all speak to trying to make sure you empower and make other people in the organization being able to get them to gain the type of independence and growth and development so that they themselves become the leaders and pass it on to the other people as well as they move forward from the organization. Now, followership theory also falls in this. So again, this is the focus now of redefining, looking at leadership, but not through the leader, but through the followership. So again, it speaks to this approach to the relationship. It flips the script on, instead of focusing its attention on the leadership, it focuses on the followership. You'd notice something here. It rejects the industrial model in which leaders are superior to followers, but defines the rules of leaders and followers as um, having equally important but different activities. So again, we're talking about moving away from the older view of the leader being the critical thing element in the organization to the importance of the followership. So again, we have that sort of flipping the script kind of situation. We spoke about this in the last chapter when we spoke about alienated followers, sheep. Yes, people. These are the follower patterns that you wanna have here. So the idea is that you want to have effective followers, and to be able to do that, you have to really act upon it and empower people to become and motivate people to become effective followers. And it becomes the responsibility of the leader is really to get the followers to get the work done. So effective followers will have these qualities. They manage themselves well. They're committed to the organization. Um, they're committed to the purpose, principles, and persons outside of themselves. So they're more altruistic in their output. They build their competencies and focus on their efforts for maximizing impact. So again, it's a sort of selfless giving kind of situation. They're courageous, honest, and credible. And goes without saying, they're willing to take the risk. They're honest about their capacity. They're honest about what they're doing, and they're credible, which means everybody believes in what they're doing. The reciprocal nature of leadership and followership is that people will then see themselves as co-leaders or co-adventurers. So again, the shift away in this model, away from looking at the organization from the top-down model to a more inclusive model. Again, the same thing across the board that we talked about here. Flipping that look away from focused on the leader and focusing on both the leader and the followers as being critical. So, um, when by the 1900s, basically, or 1990s, I should say, leadership theories started to move away from what we call the industrial paradigm model. So, industrial paradigm really is focused on what's happening in industrialized environments, so factory floors and so on. So much so that education kind of followed. The power of industry created a knock-on effect in all supporting services to creating manpower. So I'd always talk about this in terms of how education supports the industrialization program that exists. So the function of education was to produce workers who were willing to, operate in the factory settings or operate in that industrialized setting. So uh, in the 1990s, we started to have this movement away from that. Even before this, departing from that concept of the industrial pattern of leadership. So leadership theory in the 20th century mirrored the industrial era, and that the theories were, let's take note of this, I want to read this. They were structurally functionalist, management oriented, personalistic in focus, and focusing only on the leader, goal achievement dominated, self interested, and individualistic in outlook, male oriented, utilitarian, and materialistic in ethical perspectives, and rationalistic, technocratic, linear, quantitative, and scientific in language and methodology. Now, I found this useful description of what theory the theories that governed um, leadership practice in the 20th century to look like. And I actually had an opportunity to look at some of the older textbooks in terms of this, and a lot of the textbooks were really, um, full. A lot of mathematics was actually tried to be utilized to approach for all of those different approaches we looked at before. Where they were categorizing behaviors and traits and making observations of what ought to be done and quantitative studies of this and linear equations to represent that to show some sort of linear correlation between one type of activity and another, bivariate analysis, all sorts of stuff that went on. And the reality was that leadership was the man's domain. That was another thing too. This had to change because if it didn't, or if it doesn't, then the organization is going to find itself, and its leadership in particular, is going to find itself irrelevant very quickly. Especially organizations that still are male oriented and very self interested and profit oriented. That there's nothing wrong with profits, but at the same time, it has to be profit with a sense of social purpose and social responsibility. We talked about that before as well. Um, so that whole transformational leadership thing is one of the elements that became really critical with the development of theories because of that shift away from that industrial paradigm. Um, th- it means that almost as if the theory has to become softer and really focus its attention not on outcomes and driven by documented results, but has to focus on the fact that what we're talking about here is about relationships, and relationships cannot be classified and measured and statistically analyzed because here you're dealing with emotive, subjective responses of people working together in groups and teams and so on. So it's going to rely on a lot of soft skills in essence. And in fact, I remember there was a professor, Julian, who talked about the issues of management and the challenges that management faces is not in its expertise in terms of the technical elements in terms of the operations, but it was the soft skills in managing the relationships between workers and bosses or supervisors, and in developing the relationships that would make the workplace productive. And that's something with that worth for us to look at. So another um, evolution here. Faced with an unprecedented economic, technological, and socio-political and moral, ethical tumultuous sea of change, there is a need for new theories, new applications, and just a plain new way of thinking about leadership. So, in essence, what they're saying is that the environment that we face, that we work in now, is not the environment that happened in the past. We have to have theories that are able to treat with an ever changing environment, be it from an economic standpoint, technological standpoint. I mean, we could look at the pandemic situation by itself, and you can see that that is a was a situation which we faced and we're likely to face it again. Um, Whereas there had to be immediate and very quick change, and that was something that we had to pay attention to. Now, the problem is that our education system teaches us to perceive the world around us as neat, controllable, and everything has an order. So, what has life taught you about the world around us? It's not neat. It doesn't fall into easily controllable circumstances at all times. The world is messy, and those of us with OCD have problems operating in the world because order is not easily found. All right, at least order that we find pleasing, because the world is not a neat place. So obviously we have to have theory capable of dealing with an environment in which the world is faced with chaos, and that actually brings us into the concept of chaos theory. So some of you all might have come across this before, but chaos theory are theories that evolved in leadership and other fields to try to deal with an environment full of rapid changes from one day to the next almost. Um, we have to stop looking at change as a fearful thing, but rather we have to embrace change as the only constant in life, that we need to be making changes, or else we become ill defined and irrelevant. All right. So some of the theories that we're going to be looking at here, or one theory that in particular comes up, is the chaos theory and the systems theory. Um, so again, in this circumstance, what we're doing is we're trying to again explain leadership behavior in a manner in which it has to operate in this chaotic environment. All right. Now, although the world seems to be operating in a chaotic manner, there is a pattern of things that are taking place, and it's up to us to try and see what that pattern is. The problem is predicting the pattern and the changes is the critical or difficult element. So theories that emerge during this period have to become very flexible in nature, because they have to be able to explain the environment in which we have to work in order to be able to engage with the actions that are necessary to be able to survive this world of chaos. Okay, so far everybody's following this. I see Mr. Lincoln's mic is open. Everybody's following this chaos theory system. Yes? No?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes,
Yeah?
sir.
All right. Because the reality is that these theories speak more to the world as it exists in reality now, as opposed to the world we think existed. And the unfortunate element that comes up sometimes is that we have a situation where our education system is still utilizing the assumption of the neat, controllable environment, which is why oftentimes when people come out of school, they are uh, even less prepared for the real world around them of constant change, and the ability to be variable. So that's something that we have to kind of think of from this perspective as well. All right. And the interesting takeaways is that it's a world in which multiple realities exist at the same time. It'll be difficult to identify what actually caused something to happen. Um, Things in the world will organize themselves regardless of what we do. And in the long run, it is a world that cannot be controlled by the people around, by us and by other people around. So there's some basic concepts, therefore, that we have to look at for before. So, sensitivity to initial conditions. That's the first basic concept that we need to be looking at. Also called the importance of initial conditions. It implies that how something begins determines where it may end. Okay, so we need to be aware of how something started. So be paying attention and noting where something started is important in determining where it's likely to end up. All right, because you can plot the part of likely events that's going to take place. All right. The other element is that we have to pay attention to relationships and connections that are critical in determining how we're going to navigate our way through it. So one of the things we need to be looking at is the important concept of andness and its related activity of anding. All right. So this may sound a little weird, but this occurs when you make a connection with something or someone you're literally anding with them or with it or them. Unless you and something or someone happens, no exchange occurs, nothing is produced, no energy is created. So again, this is speaking to us understanding that we cannot stand alone. We have to depend upon um, positive relationships with other people and other things around us. The and anding
So,
process is important. Yes. Question I
a
hear.
question. In terms of the ending, right? So that
Hmm.
our basic human interaction is ending then.
Some, yes, but it becomes even more critical because if we are confronting an issue or a world of chaos, then the anding, the networking, as another phrase that we could probably use, is going to become more critical, more important in determining how we're going to get to the end and how we're going to successfully navigate. All right. Now, another element that we have to pay attention to is systematic leadership is both and not either or. Now, this takes a little understanding. Something might be right or wrong, or it might be right and wrong. So we have to start thinking kind of outside the box, basically. This is what they keep on talking about. And this is that nothing around us is seen as being um, good or bad, left or right, black or white. They can be both and they can be both or not. Okay? So the idea with anding has to be combined with the concept of both and, not either or. So both and, meaning that if you're trying to find a solution to a problem, there's a tendency for us to look for a single response. All right. So that like mathematics. In mathematics, they always say there's only one right answer. Right? I don't know how many times I've heard that statement in my life. But to the world around us, the issues that face us, the chaos that face us, there's no one right answer. But we may have different perspectives from different individuals, each with a partial solution. So, what we have to do is we have to end up these partial solutions and hopefully come to some partial solution to the problem that we face, and not an entire solution that will solve the whole problem. You follow? We'll get some aspects dealt with, but some aspects we'll have to find some other solutions that we have to add back to the set that we have. You understand where this ending and then the second statement of both and, not either or. So we have to stop thinking about is either we do this or that. No, we have to think about, well, let's try both. Both of these and or they can no longer be mutually exclusive type of activities then. So that takes a little getting used to. Finding more than one wrong answer to find a right answer. I don't know if that makes sense to guys. More than one wrong answer to find the right answer. Again, we can't think of this from the perspective of mathematics, but how do you feel about this? Because the world around us is more like this than it is than what all the other theory was
Yeah.
was postulating. Yes, go ahead.
So, but in our world, right, or in our society, we
Uh-huh.
may not always have time to weigh out whichever option might be the best option. Sometimes you might have to think a little more logical based on the circumstance or the situation. Sometimes you
Yes,
might have to
one.
get quicker to the point and
Mm-hmm.
wait and not to try and fish out to find the correct answer.
Right, but you're not waiting. What you're not waiting on is the right answer. You're finding an obvious methodology to deal with the question. Is it right or wrong? It might be both. That's the point they're trying to make here. That there's not one solution to the problems that faced us. You follow me? But a
Yeah, understood.
combination of half right things to try and find a solution. So let's try this technique, for example, to deal with the crime situation that we face in Trinidad. We've been using similar techniques for, I don't know, since I have been paying attention to policing and the issues, and we're not getting anywhere. So obviously, whatever we're doing is not working. So what do you think can work? Well, the situation is not going to be one answer. That's the problem that we're talking about. Because in the past, that is the approach. We're looking for one solution to fix a problem that has a wide ambit of issues that create the problems that we face. Okay? So the complex nature of the problem that we're looking at really requires the application of a number of different approaches, all working simultaneously. There's no one right way to do anything, and that's the approach we're looking at. And yes, uh, we might like to want to get the answer running right and quickly based upon logic and what is available to us in terms of resources, but it doesn't mean that we're going to actually solve the problem, because maybe we haven't looked at it in that particular perspective before. All right. So I understand the comment you're making, but at the same time, what we have to pay attention to is that we can't ignore any of those other solutions that are coming to us, because at the time, one individual or one group of individuals has ascertained that that is the wrong solution. Especially if it's part of the people that currently exist, who are trying to find solutions and been utilizing one set of tools. All right. So something to think about. All right. Moving forward. Right. So the essence of the chaotic system or chaos is that the systems sort of like self-organize naturally. And when they self organize, if we think about it from that perspective, there is a type of, what do you call it? A sort of um, balance that ends up finding its way into that particular organization or particular situation. And it finds its own balance in itself. So it's not what we perceive what we wanted, but there's a balance that arises regardless of what we think. All right. Um, Problem with this theory, of course, is because it is rather vague. Or the phrase that they talk about here is nebulous in nature. And it's difficult to nail down and problematic in terms of thinking. But again, if we think about the world around us, nothing really is, hard and fast and nailed down. The changes that are hitting us, will come from left field, and we need to be able to build a system or to create a method in which we are able to respond to it. To be able to find the right solutions across the board. Well, not right solutions, but partial solutions that help to save our situation or circumstances. All right. Um, we can't think right. So, for instance, things like underestimating the influence that certain individuals have in the organization in helping finding solutions. This is oftentimes done. We don't ask people in parts of the organization that we don't consider important as to a way in which we could help to fix the organization. That's something we have to stop doing, because there could be perfectly good solutions available from the non-traditional approaches to things that we've been ignoring for a very long time, which is maybe obvious to those individuals that, if you do this, you'll get it right, kind of thing. But we just simply because we underestimate what they're capable of doing and we don't see it from their perspective. Again, it's about sharing perspective. In a circumstance like this is important for perceptions to be shared, because the more perceptions that we can understand, it's the more ways in which we're looking at the same issue or problem, and therefore we are likely to find more than one approach to correct, if not the entire problem, at least different aspects of the problem that we can eventually organize from. All right. Okay. So another development in terms of theory is authentic leadership. So this one sits upon a very I have to say, from my perspective, it sits upon a very idealistic um, situation. It speaks about leadership as a reciprocal organization in which we are holding everybody up to some very high standards, both leaders and followers, starting from the very choice of the leader. The leader must be somebody who is authentic and be seen to be authentic in society. There's no, what's the word I want to use? There's no room for subversion and there's no room for hiding. All right, so authentic people are at the center of authentic leadership. It is at the base of all positive social constructs based upon this theory. All right, they describe authentic leaders as the confluence of positive psychology, transformational leadership, and moral, ethical leadership. And the authentic leader as someone who is, and let's look at this, confident, hopeful, optimistic, resilient, transparent, moral and ethical, future oriented, genderless, it's missing from here, and gives priority to developing associates to be leaders. Now, why did I add in genderless? Anybody get that one? That's something we actually had to do with positioning students. Anybody knows why we use the phrase genderless?
I guess because your gender don't matter in terms of leadership.
It's ought not to. So it's not supposed to be male oriented, female oriented, or any other form of orientation. And genderless is becoming more critical now because of the evolution of how people are starting to define themselves as male, female is not what do they call it, cis male and cis female type thing. That's something that's going to start to infringe upon our society fairly quickly because we import external influences quite easily into our society. So we're going to begin to get that type of thinking. We already have to deal with and treat with alternative lifestyles. And when we think of alternative lifestyles, primarily we think of people who are gay. But there are other lifestyles on top of that that we may not even begin to fathom, which is why gender is becoming another issue. But one of the problems that I have with finding people like this is that can somebody realistically have all of these characteristics all at the same time? Can they arrive in a situation like that? And that's what the theory is sitting on. These people have to be authentic, and in order to be authentic, they have to have all of these things sitting in their armory already. Okay. um, Authentic leaders as persons who have achieved high levels of authenticity in that they know who they are, what they believe and value, and act upon those values and beliefs while transparently interacting with each other. So again, everything is done in the full glare of the public eye. Interesting things that they talk about. The concept of authentic leadership adds much to understanding of leadership. Um, they describe authentic leader as root construct. So again, for authentic leadership to exist, there must be this authentic individual at the base of it. So again, we kind of putting back too much emphasis on the leader themselves, um, because if that leader lacks any of those core values, then chances are you can develop an organization that is going to be based upon some sort of lie, which is kind of critical for us to look at. Okay, so that this is one of the reasons why I see this model as being a little bit too right, really nice, idealistic, but practical, maybe not. Followers are especially important to authentic leaders because authentic leadership includes authentic followers. So again, not only is you require authentic leadership, you also require authentic followership, and that authentic followership will have a symbiotic relationship with with the leader because each one holds each other accountable to each other, which practical. I mean, that is how actually how society ought to work. I mean, we operate in an environment, and we hold each other accountable to higher and higher standards of ethical behavior. All right. Um, we don't turn away when somebody's doing something that is not right. We confront them and we make them understand that what they're doing is dangerous, what they're doing is unfair, and that type of behavior. Again, where's the reality in relation to this? All right. So these are some of the characteristics that they're talking about: transparency, openness, trust, guidance towards worthy objectives, an emphasis on follower development. So again, they're marrying parts of the servant leadership or the stewardship models into this, where we are again as a leader not only have all these characteristics and very open and authentic, but we are also helping followers to develop in the same light in in anticipation of the follower taking up the leadership positions eventually. So this again, we could walk away from this a little bit because I think you all got the gist of the idea in relation to how this model works and the situation that we find ourselves working in here. So I'll just go through this here. Authentic leaders do not fake their leadership. Authentic leaders do not take on leadership roles or engage in leadership activities for status, honor, and other personal rewards. Authentic leaders are original, not copies. Authentic leaders are leaders whose actions are based upon their values and convictions. All right. So, um, so let's leave authentic leadership alone for a bit and see if there's anything critical. So, what they're saying here is that authentic leaders can use any other form of leadership styles to get what they need to be done, but they have to be doing it in an authentic manner. That's in essence of what they keep on saying here through it. You guys can go through this within more details according to what. All right, so we come into the end here. I want to get into this chapter summary. So we've gone through a lot here. We've really kind of gone through how leadership is defined, what are the emergence of leadership over years, how it has developed over time, and at the end of the day, we're looking at how these theories kind of came and went as they moved through certain things. And so some of the things that we want to pay attention to is really, you know, trying to get an idea of the transition of the concepts and ideas and looking at how the concepts of the past impacted upon what took place in the future. Um, so what we have to look at is the environment, the environmental impact on the development of these theories over time. So I kept on reminding you all of what prevailing thoughts were or prevailing behaviors existed in the time frames in which these theories kind of developed. Now, there's one area that I kind of left out a bit, and that's the area of the latter part of the 1930s into the 40s during the World War One and Two. That period there, that was dominated by the trait theory, the and the great man theory. That was supported by scientific studies of eugenics of the time. Anybody's familiar with what eugenics is? No?
I like the picking and choosing of certain traits to go on.
Correct. So eugenics is really about the study of humans and their genetic makeup, and the fact that the best race has particular sets of traits. So eugenics became highly connected with that ideology of superiority of particular races over others. So we're going to find that a lot of theory were very racial in their orientation. in that certain people could not be leaders. And I think I'd mentioned some of that. Eugenics was utilized during that period of World War One to two, and even to this day, we still hear a lot of that ideology coming up with certain leaders and certain leadership models, in which there are certain people who should be leaders and other people who can't be leaders, and that's some of the stuff that we have to come to grips with. That whatever prevailing thoughts, be it from a scientific background, from the cultural backgrounds, they had an impact upon the development of theories during the period that took place there. All right, so I want to take us to a short video clip, and I'm hoping that that you all can hear it. You all will let me know um, if it works. Let me put it here. Let me know if you all can hear it. Um, okay, you guys hearing this commercial?
No, sir.
Nope. Hearing anything at all?
No, sir.
Nope. Okay. All right, I'll tell you what. To save time with this, what I'll do is I will put this. I thought I had shared my. It's where I shared my. Try that and see. All right. You all hearing anything there?
No, sir.
It's very low.
You're hearing it through your speakers, I believe.
Yeah, I'm
It's
having my
very low, yeah.
headset. All right, I'll tell you what I'll do. This is like a review of the chapter where this guy kind of goes through the same evolution. So what I'll do is I'll put this into the chat so you all can look at it at your own pleasure. All right, but because I don't want to keep you all much longer because we kind of put this here. All right. Oops, wrong thing. Anyway, it's there. You should be able to get it from here. All right. Okay, so you all should be able to get to that. Cool? So what I want you all to think about is you don't need to worry about memorizing all this stuff. There's no exam on this, right? What I really want you all to pay attention to is really coming to grips with the concept that all of these theories emerged utilizing the well, not utilizing, but utilizing different techniques, especially we could even map the development of social sciences and how it became more scientific in its approach. But the key concern is really going to be about how they were able to kind of go all scientific for a while and very industrial in nature, and then move back into really being more observational about relations and relationships. So the model we're looking at, the relational leadership model that I'll be going into much more detail next week, really focuses on paying attention to the nature of relationships, which means we're really being dependent upon behavioral sciences and psych and sociology as the basis, and of course, educational and educational development is going to be a major part of the thing. But as I said before, we don't need to memorize the stuff. What I want you to do is to pay attention to the kind of connections that you're looking at. And I find that little video is also quite useful in getting the same kind of reviewing everything in terms of all the emergence of the different theories. And at the end of that thing is going to ask you to reflect upon which theory stood out to you, which one appeals to you, and why. All right. Again, self-discovery and self-development. All right, guys. Any questions? I see there's a message.
Excuse.
Nope.
So you're putting it in the
Sir?
chat in the classroom.
I left it in the chat. I already copied it to the chat, but I will add it as a resource. Yeah, into the
Okay.
e-classroom. Cool. Oh, speaking of which, let me
I'm not seeing it in the chat.
You're not seeing it in the chat. I just this minute posted. How is that possible?
I saw it, sir.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
there.
it's
Yeah,
Yeah,
there.
it's
it's
there,
there.
it's there.
Okay.
Well, I put it a second time now. I don't know. Are you sure you're in the right chat? BUSI 203 Monday CRN 10527.
I'm in the class, but I see on the chat that I'm in the class.
No, not that chat.
The
The
group chat.
WhatsApp chat.
Oh, I'm looking at the chat in the class here.
Yeah, you're looking at the wrong chat group, honey. Failed to listen. All right. Well, now you know where to find it, right? In the
Yes.
WhatsApp chat. You see, that'll last longer. When I close the class, the link will go. All right. All right, guys. So, any questions, any concerns, any comments people want to make in terms of
So
which of the yeah, remote? Go ahead.
in terms of the resources, right? All the citations and the data that we use any of these any readings that we have provided in the
Yeah.
classroom in the e-classroom.
Yeah. Well, in the when you say in the e-classroom, what do you
I'm
mean?
talking about the books and stuff that was their first reference.
But the books are there. They are their own textbooks, so they reference themselves, so to speak. In fact, have you gone through the textbooks at all? Did you read a chapter?
Yeah, vaguely.
Okay. If you look at it in more detail, you realize that they actually do secondary referencing inside the textbooks, so you'll be able to get all the further
Citation
referencing there, and
there.
citation issues in the text itself, and you could supplement that with additional information that you want to get from, let's say you want to use some YouTube stuff, or you find some other resources that you want to sub to bring in to add to your explanations. Just anything you use outside of the text, you need to um, cite appropriately. Cool. Like, so if you're no, the textbooks are not good with images and stuff like that. So if you find images and pictures that help to reflect the ideas that you're doing, then you need to cite your sources. As you can see, in my PowerPoint, I added uh, where I got all my stuff from in terms of Google Images in particular. All right, I should stop the recording now. All right, Ramon.